All right. Well, I'm very, very excited to welcome my friend Ian Mitchell. And there's so many directions we could go with this interview, and we have about an hour. So I want to keep it valuable and stay on topic. So I guess the best place to start, and the thing that is most striking to me, is the vast array of experiences that you've had, and kind of how you arrived at this point where you're this scientist, biohacker guy, but you've done architecture, you were a musician, and you've been into so many things, which is kind of rare to arrive as a scientist in a lab, changing the world. So if you could, maybe briefly tell us a little bit about your journey and these various experiences and how maybe they all lined up to lead you to this point.
Sure. So probably I'm a little overly curious, and I've always been sort of a more than jubilant kind of guy. I genuinely am just, I've always been very happy. In fact, my best friend always tells the story because when we met, 20 something years ago, she absolutely did not like me because she thought that, like, God bless, the guy's obnoxiously happy. That can't be real. And then, over the course of interactions over a few years, we just became really tight. And that's the thing. So I just, as a substrate, I'm very happy, and I'm lucky. I love people a lot, and that's always been kind of the basis, right? So super creative, very curious, and I think those two things, the curiosity and the creativity, go hand in hand, because my dad always jokes about how he used to ask so many ridiculous questions, like very ponderous, about, could a dinosaur eat a cow? Like it's like as a very little kid, just very quizzical and
Yeah.
very serious about my
Right.
curiosity.
These ridiculous questions.
Yeah, yeah. Like, it's funny because I remember that kind of stuff, like really fixating, like, oh, all of my 7-year-old intellect on.
You needed to know, could a
Yeah,
dinosaur eat a
I
cow or
had to
whatever.
know, man. Yeah. And so it was kind of a curious process. One of the more formative things is when I was about, I don't know, I guess between 9 and 11 or so, I started having really, really horrific migraine headaches, and they took me out. I'd come home from school, they'd start coming on. I would get, you know, everything tunnels down, just tremendous amounts of pain. The only thing I could do is I'd start crying and go lay down in my room, put ice packs on my head, kill all the lights. And that started happening 3-4 days a week.
Oh,
And it was kind of debilitating. Yeah, I always have a soft spot in my heart for people who are going through migraine issues. So they, did tests and scans and couldn't find anything wrong. So on a whim, sort of, my dad said, this was in the 70s. My dad said, well, there's this new thing called biofeedback therapy. It was the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s. And he said, let's try that. So I went in, and it's kind of like the old school Ghostbusters movie where
yep.
back in the day, they put the colander on your head.
I love it.
I'm the gatekeeper, and they hook you up to everything and see what your outputs are. And it was interesting because very rapidly, when you've got the sensory data right there and you can correlate it internally, and you look at it, you go, oh, if I feel this way, this happens. Oh, my heart rate does this. As a little kid, it doesn't take long to make kind of a game out of that. And I got very adept at being able to control, all the things that were previously classed as autonomous nervous system functions, so heart rate, breathing, respiration, or I guess that's redundant, but
Yep.
body temperature, everything that supposedly was outside of the scope of your normal control and was just an autonomous function.
Autonomic. Yep.
Yeah, and turns out you can control all of that. And so that was kind of a precursor, which led into me doing meditation. And then I've done that for about 30 years now, and kind of a pretty intense level. And that was very transformative. But the entire time, just being curious. And so when I went to school, I studied chemistry, and then I studied jazz performance after that. And chemistry and music
Interesting
always,
combination.
well, for me, they were very similar, right? Because it was all about shapes, and everything had a kind of a tone and a shape to it, which is sort of the kinesthetic version of this synesthesia, right? Like, you're taking tactile and visual synesthesia, and you're kind of applying that to say, like, oh, look, this has a shape and a feel, and that was kind of how I always related to music. I related to it through numbers and through feel and shape. And chemistry and music were very similar because you have these compounds or you have these tones, and you're trying to find some sort of elegant resolve with them, right? You have an intent, you're trying to do something, and you can just sort of hack your way through it. Like anybody can play the right notes, but that's the difference between someone who's artful with it, where you actually want to listen,
Right.
and someone who's just kind of a hack and they're just like wedging the stuff together. And the same thing applies to, biochemistry and chemistry. Is you can get a reaction to occur, but it may yield some, kind of resultant product that isn't terribly bioavailable or isn't really going to help out that much. I mean, did you hit the mark? Yeah, you did. But if it's not really the most elegant solution, did you really do your job? And in my opinion, not so much. So, I did that. And then when I left school, I worked as a musician, right? So I was a jazz saxophonist and a relatively decent one. And traveled and played and love it.
And
I
you
still
won some
do this
accolades, I
today.
think, right?
Yeah, I did. There was a couple of there were a couple of times that I got some decent accolades for it. And I studied with a guy named Dallas Marsalis, he was pretty aces in the jazz world. And my family, my mom's a blues singer, and I grew up in New Orleans, and so in my family, you were very adept, or you literally just didn't do it, right?
Yeah.
Like there was no, it was the Yoda. There is no try, only do. And like you got it or you just didn't do it. And I really loved it. And I kind of sucked at saxophone at first, so I really worked my ass off and became pretty good. But at the time, I would do 8 to 11 hours in a practice room every day,
Hmm.
and that was in addition to classes and course load. Because at the time back in the day, I really wanted to be great at that, and that was my focus. I wanted to be great, and your results build on one another. It's kind of a compound effect of the acceleration, where the rate of change starts to increase, and you start to see these kind of hyperbolic things where you're spiking up and your abilities build on themselves. And so I worked on that a ton. I had zero social life. I just gigged a whole lot and did locked myself in the practice room and did classes. But it was formative because you start to develop mindsets about well, if I put in XYZ effort, then I'll get this result. But if I put in this much effort, I'll get this much more of a result. And you start to see that. And I think personally, those things translate because it's kind of competence, in my experience, does translate. If you're very great at one thing, then assuming you're willing to take the time and kind of cognitively figure out how to link what you want to do with what you're also already very competent at, you can kind of figure out a neural hack to get the pathway to function. Like some
Is
people
it almost like
can't.
making an analogy and then
It
something
is.
clicks? Yeah.
Yeah. It's the way neurons are structured, it's kind of like making a synaptic analogy, right? You figure out how to get it to flow in a way that works with you. And the thing that's a little tricky there is it's not just a mechanical function. A lot of times it's like you have to work with the software too, right? So you have to figure out, okay, this is how the hardware is structured. This is the software programs that we're running on in this language. How do we do it? But if you're willing to take the time to figure out how to make something work, then you can make these ridiculous gains. It's kind of like learning to read. Most people learn to read by letter, and then they group the letters as words, and then they do the words as sentences, and they literally are still doing the thing where they're going bump 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 bump. They're just doing it faster, and the way the actual brain seems to process is you start at one word, then you go to the second word, and you go back and you go to the third word, and you go back and you go to the fourth word. There's so many wasted strokes if you just kind of continue to drill down and kind of self-referentially check the process that you're doing. You'll find efficiencies and build bypasses so that you can maximize your own potential. And I think that's one of the things, like, because I'm so obnoxiously curious and want to know how so many things function, I do that with a fair degree of regularity. I'll go through and say, is this efficient? Am I doing this the right way? Is there a better way to do that? And I'm constantly doing things, like I take the neural serum I make so that I can stimulate at a faster rate than BDNF or NGF1, so I can pump out more neurons. But your brain synaptically prunes because those neurons are so consumptive, just in terms of oxygen and resources. And because your body doesn't want to waste the energy, it goes in and synaptically prunes unless you cement those neurons into place. So I'm constantly doing things like trying to learn a new language, or trying to learn a new instrument, or trying to learn rap in German, or stuff that like literally is absolutely ridiculous. One of the things I just did was and this was because I had absolutely no clue. I had a friend who was learning German because he's going to move to Germany, and he was doing it through songs, and he sent me some of the songs, and one of them was this German rap song, and it was great, but I don't speak German. And so I thought, that's probably going to put a very different cognitive load on me, to try and, synaptically reorient everything so that I can do that. So I did stuff like that. But that's part of the process. And then in falling back in how I arrived with this kind of crazy progression. And one of the other things that was very instrumental for me, at least, was there was a show that I used to mainline as a kid called Connections by this fellow named James Burke. And he would take an invention and he would start hundreds of years ago, or potentially thousands of years ago, and follow the progression that happened technologically to arrive at whatever modern construct it is he was breaking down. And it left me with the understanding that, things are built on top of other things. Very rarely does somebody come up with an entirely different concept. It's usually, humanity progressing step by step by step.
Now, let me interrupt you. Do you
Yeah.
find, or did you find from watching that show or in your research now, that as, let's say, science progresses in that fashion,
Mhm.
are any of those steps along the way based on assumption, and then they were at some point accepted as fact, and then that got built on, and then so the whole premise is kind of off? Or is
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, that's one of the things that's sometimes you'll hit puzzles. I know, like we had spoken offline about Thomas Cowan's stuff about virology, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of things like that. I mean, I've hit a lot of principles where the stuff that I was taught was wrong, or in some cases, in more often than not, it wasn't wrong. It was what was taken as fact was a subset of a much larger thing that had conditional variables. And it's kind of like the idea of the second law of entropy, right? Like, oh, you can't break the second law of entropy. Well, yeah, actually you can. Or the second law of thermodynamics, rather. Because when you look at entropy, if you look from the dynamics of far from equilibrium systems, yeah, then there are in fact exclusions and exceptions where entropy doesn't actually reign. You have to have certain orders. I mean, there was I think it was one of the professors at UT Austin got a Nobel Prize for that, for showing that far from equilibrium systems actually tended towards negentropy rather than entropy. And so yeah, the second law of thermodynamics applies in most cases, but not in all cases. So it's not really a law per se. It's a conditional construct that's applied, and you don't generally find those things until something stands out and you go, yeah, this doesn't mesh. But more often than not, and this is sad, but it's been my experience in the sciences, that because of the way funding works and because of the way academia is structured, that's totally supplicant to funding, where everybody's like, oh, the dollar. If you don't get your grants, and you can't move forward, and the university doesn't want to pay for something, well, you're kind of relegated to this position where you can't say something that's really outside of the party line, because if you get any pushback, you get pigeonholed as somebody who's a quack, and then you can't get your funding, and then your lab will get shut down. It's just this cascade, but it really isn't all that different from the way things were done when Galileo was locked away for having a concept that deviated from sort of the overarching theory at the time, which was really kind of the centrist thing about religion. Nowadays there are constructs that we have that are applicable, but yeah, there are problems with them all the time. But it's difficult. Luc Montagnier's work, right, with frequencies being locked into water, you can very simply explain that just by saying water is a crystalline lattice, right? It's an amorphous lattice that's made with hexagonal structures that stereoscopically stack. Okay, fair enough. Stereoscopic stacking of hexagonal structures implies a lattice, and a lattice implies an ordered system that you could use to, oh, I don't know, say store data. And, and
Dude,
as it
you have to
turns
check
out,
out Thomas Cowan further. I know you know him, but
yeah,
this is all his stuff. When I interviewed him, my mind was blown when he explained to me that water is basically a storage
yeah,
system in our body, and memories, you name it's all stored in our water, our structured water.
yeah, there's a whole lot to that. It is definitely a storage medium. The only thing I think, people who work on the body, this is kind of like that, he who uses a hammer tends to treat everything like a nail. The only maybe additional correlate I would say is, yeah, we are in fact a storage media, just as our genetics, but the majority of the stuff that makes us what we are isn't actually stored on the computer.
We're an
Us being
antenna,
the computer.
basically.
Yeah, it's in the cloud. I mean, we would, if we were trying to run a system that had so much data, exabytes and exabytes of data, we wouldn't put it on our desktop or our laptop or our phone. We would simply tap into it on the cloud, and we're smart enough to figure that out. And is it really that much of a jump to realize that nature figured that out way, way, way before we did? Not,
Conceivably, could you hack into my cloud and like hack my memories and thoughts?
yes. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, though, again, going back to the idea that things are gated, yeah, you could definitely do that. But one, there would be a negative repercussion for doing something like that. And two, I think the people who would certainly have developed the capacity to link into somebody else and manipulate their system or change it, yeah, you can do that anytime, anywhere. But you would almost certainly rather die before you would misuse those capacities. I mean, personally, if I had those capacities, I would 100% rather die as opposed to misuse them, because one is a temporary inconvenience and the other one's going to karmically leave a mark. At
Right.
least, at least by my own experience, that's that's
Well,
where
I
I'm
think you're
at.
probably right.
Yeah,
So kind of back to your progression towards the mad scientist you are now.
yeah.
One thing
Well,
that struck me when you were telling me your story is you have that creative ability, and then you're very analytical. So you meet doctors, you meet scientists who don't have that other half of the brain capacity to be creative, but you seem to have both.
I think a lot of that had to do with neural feedback, because when you get complete entrainment on both hemispheres of your brain and you're able to, because again, I don't really think it's coming from us. I think it's coming through us. When you're able to activate the receiver on that component of your brain, I think routinely engineers may be generally able to activate the stuff on the left side of their brain, and hence they're super analytical, but not the right side of the brain,
Right.
because there's a drop in the creative component. But when you can turn on both receivers and you get messages across both hemispheres of your brain, you're able to do stuff that's kind of artful and pretty, because you understand the technical components. And beyond a certain point of technical prowess, it really does become artistic, because it's how elegantly can you solve the puzzle that you're trying to solve. And so for me, some of the varied things, when I was playing music full time, at the time my dad was teaching, and he was teaching anthropology and archaeology. And I remember calling him and saying, God, I don't have anything to do during the days. And he said, well, you did construction when you were in college. Why don't you just do that? And I thought, yeah, it'd be easy. So, because I never drank or smoked or did any drugs or anything like that. And so even though I was in the music scene, I was sort of, you know, there, but not really there. I didn't really partake in everything most of
Yep.
the guys did. I was there because I genuinely loved music. And so during the days, I started doing, construction and just did carpentry work. And I loved it, because you have a tangible sense of accomplishment. You go out, you build a house, or you build a cabinet, or you do something like that. And there was sort of a very fulfilling, sense at the end of the day when you go, look, I built this, and I enjoyed that. But then I started looking at it, and mentally I could grapple with doing that, but then I could also understand how the whole house was structured, and kind of blow through like an expanded parts diagram of how the entire thing went together. And I figured, well, I think maybe I'll just start designing these things. So I started doing that, and then I thought, well, seems like the guys that are doing well are actually the guys who are doing the whole subdivision. So then I started doing that, and and it just kind of led from one thing to the other, and then I built a resort, and
You
I
hadn't
really
studied architecture, had you?
no, I hadn't, but I did then. I just did it at a very rapid pace. I taught myself AutoCAD in one night, and just because I wanted to understand how to do it. And all the systems, they're all built by people, and they're not built to be cloistered. Unlike mathematics was back in the day. The systems where people build a program, they're actually building it for people to use. So if you approach it with the mindset of these guys actually intend for people to be able to interface with this, so there's going to be some sort of logical progression, and then you just do a really hardcore deep dive. It's not that tricky, right? If they're trying to obfuscate things and make it difficult, yeah, that might be tricky. But when they're literally like, please use our software, it sounds fancy, but it's not really that tricky to work yourself through it and understand how all that stuff functions. I mean, basically, if it's built by a human, it's generally built for other humans. I don't I can't think of a whole lot of systems off the top of my head where people are like going, ha ha, I've built the best interface for aardvarks ever. They all want other people to use their stuff. So yeah, I didn't study it formally, but then I studied it very, very much in depth, with a lot of fervor, probably a little bit obsessively, and got pretty good at it. There are a lot of structures all around Austin that are things that I've designed, and yeah, it was kind of nice.
So
And
cool.
yeah, it's fun, and actually it's been impactful because, like I said, I really, all the time that I was working doing the actual tangible construction components, I was a little frustrated because I thought, God, I'm not using my talents, and I'm not really doing this. I'm just kind of marking time. But it was incredibly lucrative when I sort of progressed through it. And if you show up literally and you're lucid and you're not drunk and you have a vehicle that works, you've basically ousted the majority of the
Right.
competition. So that was pretty handy. But I really kind of transitioned out of that. But one of the things that was incredibly key for me now is that I've been working on the carbon negative concrete and trying to do systems that are more sustainable, is having a thorough firsthand understanding of having done that, having thrown concrete and finished concrete and, tied rebar and dug the trenches and all that sort of stuff, like actually understanding from a systemic perspective, experientially. I used to think it was a waste of time that I'd done all that, but turns out it was probably the fastest way to get me to the point that I'm at now, where I do have a very large breadth of understanding. I mean, I can wire a house, I can do the plumbing, I can do the air conditioning, the electrical, whatever.
It's amazing. Yeah. I could think of a few personal examples where on a smaller scale, that's true. And I can think of either jobs I had or activities that I did that, seemed to be going nowhere and didn't really seem to have much purpose and, seemed kind of pointless. And then fast forward a few years and you have, a handful of these various experiences. Somehow they all seem to tie together to
Yeah.
make something pretty cool.
Well, I think of it a lot of times in terms of, kind of Joseph Campbell's, the hero's journey, where, you're meandering down the road and you're like, huh, look, strange, rabbit's paw, and you pick it up only to find, many steps down the road that you must possess the magic rabbit's paw to defeat the dragon,
Right.
and it's just, the world has a way of linking things in so that the tapestry is very specific to the specific skill set. And again, that could be just sort of a projection of trying to map out our experiences on top of our reality, and it's hard to say which is kind of the egg or the chicken, which came first. Your ability to do those things led you to these, or you were led to these and needed those abilities, so you were put
Right.
in a position. Personally, my take on it now is that, and this is almost kind of reductionist, but is that it's already built. The whole hologram is complete, and our consciousness is just kind of rolling through it, and it's the experience of experiencing as we move through, to progress. And it's funny because it's my basis being really scientific on most of these things, just even without the science, was always a very scientific approach. You do the experiment, you get the result. Whether the experiment is, can you build a structure that's more efficient and better? That's still an experiment. I mean, at its core, scientific method is a beautiful thing.
And you could apply it anywhere.
Across the board. Yeah, it's, and it should be ubiquitously applied. You should question things all the time, and you should be open to getting an answer that you're not expecting. And I think, I can't tell you, I'm so much more often wrong than not. But that's okay. It's just data, right? If you get really wrapped around the axle of like, damn it, I didn't get this right. I mean, I was doing a thing with gamma ray shielding in the lab the other day, and we had this whole test set up with, radioactive materials and then superconductors and then, liquid nitrogen, and we were doing all this stuff. And I had literally already written out the patent because I was so convinced that I knew how it was going to work. Wrong. When we did the data, I literally should have heard like the Family Feud thing of like,
yeah,
because it turns out what I actually found was probably more beneficial than what I was going for. And I was able to take that data and then use it to actually do what I was setting out to do for the shielding. But I was literally 100% wrong. I thought it was going to block something, and it ended up accelerating it as a waveguide.
How often do you think preconceived biases among scientists affects the outcome? And you're objective about it, and you're happy to get a failure because you learned. But is that the norm?
Yeah, man. There's this Far Side cartoon, and I always use this as the reference when someone will ask this question, because you get it a lot, and it is pervasive in sciences. And it's this Far Side cartoon where there are two sharks swimming side by side, and one's got his eye popped up and he's looking at the other one, and the caption is something to the effect of, "Dude, your dorsal fin's sticking out. Wonder how long that's been screwing stuff up for us." Because it is just, there are so many times when things are like that. We just have this preconceived notion, and we just keep rolling down the berry path with it, when in fact it's completely either erroneous or just not applicable, or we're just completely missing what's right in front of us.
Well, and it turns out you've done some pretty amazing things, and we should dive into some of those things that you're working on now. But I think that from my perspective, your ability to remain neutral and not give into those biases is probably part of your superpower. The fact that you almost don't care what the results are. You're just learning.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I mean, if you're in kindergarten, which is kind of how I feel compared to the vast amount of knowledge that's out there that I'd really like to know, if you get completely destroyed emotionally every time you're wrong, kindergarten's going to really suck. So I'd rather keep an open mind and go, well, this is what I think is going to happen, but if it goes another way, great, let's see what that can do. And yeah, I mean, that approach has led me to be able to do a lot of things. I mean, one of my partners when I started one of my first companies, he was a chemist who went to a thing called IISC in India, which is the Indian Institute of Science, and he was a brilliant materials chemist. And I came up with a new way of bonding lipids to nanoparticles and doing this kind of like different sort of reduction, and then linking them to saccharides. And I said, look, I've done this thing. And I remember him saying, well, that's not possible. We've been taught that is not possible. I said, no, it's possible. He goes, no, it's not possible. I said, it's in the beaker. It's like, it's right here. It's not that this is some intangible concept. It's in the jar right next to us. And he goes, well, how did you do it? And I said, well, turns out it's conditional, right? You have to follow this very specific thermal curve, and then you get the head of the molecule to actually crack a little bit. And when it starts to open, then you have to modify the thermal curve, and then you get it to shut down. You can actually get a linkage. And and after I explained it and showed it, it's like, oh, well, okay, so it's conditional. It's based on thermal catalysis, and and then it was possible. But at first, it was just this staunch no, because that's not what the book says. And yeah, I mean, honestly, I arrived at that because I just kind of intuited how to do it and did it. I think I probably would have fallen prey to it's not in the book myself had it not been sort of an intuitive thing. And that goes back to the thing we had talked about earlier with when you just allow it to be an intellectual construct and all you're trying to do is use cognitive tools, I think what's that phrase colloquially? You're fucked. I'm pretty sure that's it. Um, it takes you to a certain threshold, but if you really want to be of benefit, not to say that the other can't be, but if you really want to move the needle and do some great things and help a lot, I think you really do kind of have to get past the point where you have the hubris to say like, oh, I can intellectually grasp all of this. No, you can't. You have to open your construct and take down some of the walls and go, I can intuitively probably grasp a lot more than I can cognitively understand. And when you hit that part, it's a little humbling because it's so much. And as people, we really sort of suck at multivariate systems analysis. That's just the way we're fundamentally built. And it's difficult to cognitively progress through that when it's not how we're structured. But the benefit to how we are really built is that you can expand your perceptions and intuitively grasp a tremendous amount of things at a very visceral level and have a knowing as opposed to a learning. And because you progress so far through knowledge acquisition, but at a certain point you have to stop and go, okay, I need more. I need to tap into more. My head can only hold so much. What is that thing? And it's been my experience that's the component where the meditation really kicks in, and trying to get rid of yourself and just tap into the field, the construct that contains the information all around you, and open yourself up enough and put your ego aside to just let the ideas move through you.
And it's also your brain doesn't have to figure it out. You don't have to use your brain or the human mind to sort this construct out. It's like you surrender and you tap into the information that exists.
Yeah, it's very difficult to do that, I think, because the idea of being subordinated, which is how most people think of surrender, is I think it's sort of self-effacing. But my personal experience is that's actually the most profound component, is when you hit a point where you're okay with realizing that it's not that you're being relegated to a lesser position. It's just that you're being comfortable with the role that you've been given. I mean, you never want to have your food delivered by a waiter who hates the fact that he is in fact a waiter, and his life is miserable because he's your waiter.
Right.
I mean, it's an entirely different thing. I've had some fantastic experiences with people who seem genuinely happy, kind of like you were talking about earlier with the fellow you met at the hardware store, right, at Home Depot.
Yep.
And those kind of interactions where people are genuinely happy with where they are in life. I mean, we all have things in my perspective, or from my perspective, we all have things that we're meant to do and meant to contribute. And, all of that could go away tomorrow. It could change tomorrow. And, there are times in life, I always tell myself, Nikola Tesla dug ditches. There was a point. I mean, Tesla was a brilliant guy. I will very rarely say that. It's kind of a sparing thing. There aren't a whole lot of people that truly have that spark. He had that spark. Walter Russell had that spark. Tesla had that spark. Da Vinci had that spark. Archimedes had that spark. It's not all that common, but those guys had it and they used it, but they all found themselves at points doing what would have been considered menial tasks that were far beneath them.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the reality is those guys, I think, realized that none of that is, if that's where you're at that moment and that's what you're supposed to do, then that's what you do. It's wash dishes or whatever
Right.
is the particular task in front of you. You do it, and you do it to the best of your ability with the most heart that you can, while trying to impact the people that are in your sphere as positively as you can. I mean, ultimately, that's what it gets back to, right? Is how we relate to one another as people. I mean, because frankly, I love being able to do this. I would do it, and did do it, without pay for quite a long time, just because it's something I was passionate about. But I would hazard a guess, all the people who are really coming from their heart want to do this. If my role changed tomorrow and I was supposed to become something entirely different, I'd embrace it, because there'd be a purpose to it. And as much as I love this, I'd walk away and do whatever the next thing that was required of me was.
on one hand, it seems so simple. It's almost like have a genuine positive attitude, do kind things, don't let go of the hubris, as you put it, and magical things can happen. But it's so rare that it must not be that simple.
No, it's funny because and we're friends and we've talked about this before, but it's kind of like, that sort of the approach that you read about in a lot of Zen books and Buddhist texts and, Hindu documents and even some of the old Gnostic Christian stuff. It's kind of like they always talk about, you're holding yourself back. You need to let go. You need to release. And that is for guys that are wired like biohackers, where you want to kind of change the environment and figure out how to tinker and do all this stuff. That is like the absolute hardest thing to do, is to just go, oh, I'm going to put it
You're
down
so right.
now. I mean, we're all wired about doing and doing and doing, and very rarely do we focus on being and being and being.
And
Because
it's also
that
cultural, especially
it
in
is,
America.
man.
It's work hard, and go, go,
Right.
go.
And we'll go to a party. Like, what do people ask you? They don't, who are you? How are you being? It's all about what do
No,
you do?
yeah,
Right. It's an action verb. It's
that's
like,
right.
how do you engage with the world actively? And I think one of my crowning achievements was while having a dream, sitting down in the dream and going, I think I'm going to meditate now. And I just remember it as clear as a bell, because I mean, as fate would have it, I remember my dreams. But it was a really profound point for me to hit, where I remember thinking, God, this is just like being awake. All this stuff is happening and everything is seemingly spinning and moving and happening and going. And there's all this, kinetic expression and all these things worrying about their distractions. This is cool, but I think I'm just going to sit down and be quiet. And, starting to meditate while I was in a dream. And it sounds kind of ephemeral, but it was really kind of an impactful moment to me, because you generally don't snap to your awareness enough to go, oh, this is not really where I should place my focus. And the place that we are right now, in my estimation, is the same. There are times when you should just be quiet, be still, be quiet, figure out how you can contribute, be kind, and do it. It's funny because all of the scientific components, I've been able to do some things, but only in the capacity where they're helpful for other people. That's always been kind of the commonality. And some of the things I've developed them to a point where I've answered the question, I have the answer. No one else will ever see that, because I don't really think that I don't think it would be used well,
Right.
and so I'm not going to let it out of the door. It's a point at which, and maybe I'm wrong. If I ever get the nudge that, like, now is the time for this to go out, I'll happily open the door and share everything and just send it out in mass. But some of the things that I had questions about intellectually, one, they're probably different than a lot of people, but two, I don't know that I would, I don't know that I would trust that because in my lesser moments when I'm not really on point, there's still a lot of psychological strife, kind of in the quagmire of my own psyche. And if I were in a bad spot, I don't know that I would be able to hold up under the pressure. So I'd rather not not put that out as the
Yeah.
shiny object for everybody to try
So
and grab
basically,
on.
you have some inventions in your head that could either cure cancer or blow up the entire planet, and
Yeah,
better protect that. Yeah.
yeah, and that's the thing. Well, yeah, yeah, there are some interesting things like that, and I wish more people were playing with it. I mean, there are a lot of really brilliant people doing a lot of things where their hearts are in the right spot and they're really trying to move the needle. I mean, I'm lucky in that, because of where I'm at. I do Bulletproof's R&D, and I'm the chief science officer at a stem cell clinic in Mexico, and so I have access to a lot of technology that other people don't get to, and then more importantly, I play with a lot of people that I truly admire, that I think are just really absolutely freaking brilliant, and it's always an inspiration. So I mean, for me at least, you kind of want to pace up.
Yeah.
I love it when I'm the slow guy in the room. I was with a friend of mine,
Can't imagine that.
Yeah, well, it's, it's kind of by domain, right? So I have a friend he's just he runs a marketing company and he's brilliant. And his approach to that stuff, he literally did some things in about, I don't know, 2 maybe 3 minutes the other day to show me how you could get a page ranked at the top of Google without any ad spend. And I remember I was just dumbfounded. I was kind of awestruck because it's not my particular domain, but it was probably the equivalent of me pouring a couple things together in beakers and flasks and having it do some, kind
Right,
of
right.
crazy reaction where it shoots sparks. Totally, like not a big deal, can happen on the regular all the time. But for a layperson, it's like, oh wow, and I think that was the case with this. I just watched him do it and thought, holy cow, that's unbelievable. Like, I know with our companies, we spend a fair amount on ad spend trying to get things out so that people have the awareness of like, look, this solves this problem. Because you're trying to do that, and lo and behold, the people who are really the best at it in the world, they don't even have to do that, and that's kind of that's sort of a specific genius. But I did, and we were sitting at a table in Dallas, and I remember saying, God, I love being the slow guy in the room. This is awesome because there's so much more, and it's not my thing. I've got actually one of my friends that we do the biocharge project together, the ozonated oil. Bobby's like that in terms of business. I mean, he's a real estate developer in Austin, and he has a company called Cielo, and he's a genius. I mean, he's got a knack for making deals and doing real estate. He sees business in the same way I see molecules,
Right.
and yeah. There's just, I have so much admiration when you see somebody who's like that in whatever their thing is, whatever that specific domain is, and they just absolutely crush it.
What is the quote? I mean, it's true genius is realizing how little you actually know, and you certainly have that.
Yeah, man. Again, it's like it's a lot like being in kindergarten. You surround yourself with people where you're like, what, a what, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sounds like a fun way to go about life, man. I'm
yeah,
more
it
like a
is.
like a dog. I'm like, huh? What was that? Huh? What was that? But I don't know what my superpower is yet. Maybe you can help me find it.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we only have so much time, and I want to get into some nuts and bolts and tell folks some of the things you're working on.
Sure,
And
man.
what a fun question would be, or rather a fun answer I'd love to hear is, what are the top, say 2 to 5 inventions or products that you've come up with over the years that have moved the needle the most and that you're most proud of?
Um, okay, so things that are accessible to people or just things in
Ooh,
general?
I would rather hear the latter.
Okay. Um, so the things that have been very cool to me, that I think will at some point become necessary. I developed a new ionic propulsion system, and it works rather well, and I think that's going to be impactful, because it's not, there are other ion propulsion systems. I've been tinkering with this stuff like literally since I was a little kid, but I made some changes actually based on a lot of the principles that Walter Russell spelled out. And when I finally was able to wrap my head around that, I had new insights about how some subsets of what I was trying to do actually function. So, normally you're trying to get a yield where you don't have a spent propellant, right? So, for space travel. And what I'm actually thinking that this will be used for is satellites, to just reorient telemetry on satellites, because it requires very little juice, and you can put it in a very small packet, the size of maybe a quarter. And I think that the first blush will probably be for CubeSats, the little 10 by 10 by 10
Mm-hmm.
centimeter CubeSats. That I think is pretty cool, and it's done in a different way. That it's not just manipulating things based on ionization propulsion. It's actually using the motion of the ions to actually tap into other components that haven't really been paid attention to yet. So that's
Man,
something that I think is actually pretty
kind of
cool.
cool.
Yeah. Well, because it's, it'd be like finding, Coriolis effect where things are, spiraling and then going, hey, well, we've entirely missed this component of it, which is, in this case, that's exactly what it is. Just subtle components of physics that haven't been really paid attention to. They're there. They've always been there. We just, it's truth is like a short man in a room. Sometimes you just stare right above its head, you know, that's,
Yep. Well, I tell you, next time we have you on, we should get into some Walter Russell in a little more detail, because I feel like that's part of your superpower. You see the world differently, or you see science differently. And you introduced me to him, and now I see the world differently. And I was telling you before the call, a lot of stuff just clicked for me when I started to comprehend what he was saying in that book. And it's funny. Now I think, man, 99.9% of all scientists think, like, I mean, take the periodic table. They think of the traditional periodic table. You don't. You look at it through his lens, and you've been able to come up with some pretty crazy, powerful inventions that probably most scientists would say are not possible.
Yeah, I've gotten that a lot, actually. The president of one of the big 10 pharma companies flat out told me at the International Bio Conference a while back, he was like, nah, I'm gonna call bullshit. I don't think you could have done that. I said, look, happy to share all the data with you. I'll show it to you, because I have nothing to hide. I mean, it's done for people's benefit. So, but a lot of times it's just when you go into something with the mindset of it's not possible, that, to quote Henry Ford, if you think you can, or if you think you can,
You're right.
you're right. And
Exactly.
so you just kind of have to check your perceptions on things. I mean, we only know science, and I've tried to drill this down for my youngest son, who's a really brilliant kid, and that science is something that's viewed through a lens of temporality. We're locked into a very specific time frame. The science that we're doing now is going to be something that 1,000 or 2,000 years from now, people will think is cute. They won't think. And if we saw the tech from that point, it'll probably appear, to Arthur C. Clarke's thing, it'll appear as if magic to us, because the tech will be so elegant that we won't understand how it works. Things will probably be moving at a subatomic or quantum level. I mean, I can tell you, matter of fact, the stuff I've been playing with in a quantum sphere lately, absolutely mind-blowing to me. It gets back to a lot of the water as a storage medium kind of stuff. Well, it's not just water. The biocharge product that I did, it's, as much as I hate to use the term quantum, because it sounds like absolute marketing BS.
You're full of shit. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was either that or tiny little packets of energy, like,
we'll go with quantum.
Yeah, quantum seemed a whole lot easier, but that particular product, it was something that it was an ozonated oil that was, my intent was to replace autohemotherapy with it, right? So you could take a little bitty capsule and get the same net effect as if you had pulled out 100 cc's of blood and then introduced ozone and then reintroduced it to your body via IV. And it's not the exact same effect. That actually is still a little more pronounced, but it's a pretty good approximation. And for the fact that I can pop it pill, it's a whole hell of a lot easier than going to do either autohemotherapy or rectal insufflation.
Yep, it's more convenient and slightly cheaper, I would say.
Way more convenient, way cheaper. Yeah, but that was a process. Actually, Tesla had done the original work on that, and he had done this portable ozone generator and started the Tesla Ozone Company, I think in 1904. And when I went back and looked at his oil, because he started selling this Tesla's ozonated oil stuff, I remember thinking, like, what the hell was he doing? And so I looked at it and I started reading all the documents, and his process took roughly 8 weeks to do. And he had these large beds where he'd fill them with oil, and then he would slowly bubble ozone through it. But the special sauce for his thing was all these beds were on top of giant magnetic coils. And then I looked at what's being done now when people make ozonated oil, and it's a 2.5 week process. Everybody pumps everything through a Venturi, and then you just mix the ozone. You do a triple redox pass until it's forms stabilized ozonides,
Mm-hmm.
and that's everything everybody's done for the past 100 years. And I thought, Tesla's smart. What like, he's one of the actual smart guys. What was he doing? And then it clicked in my head that he had all these polar molecules. And when you put a polar molecule directly above a magnetic field, you can effectively get them to line up in single file, because as the viscosity changes, as the redox pass keeps going and it starts to stabilize and becomes more and more solidified, you're getting the highest energy density in those little packets, because you're orienting everything, and you're blocking, because they're locking in a magnetic field, as opposed to having an ozonide next to an ozonide where there might be an interaction and you trigger just a recombination to just O2. You can actually hold those things apart in the field so that they don't react
No reactions.
until they're taken into the body. And which is why so many people talked about how miraculous his oil was.
And does that mean there's literally more space to cram more, ozonides in? Yeah.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Yeah, you orient them just like you would with seraphopitic crystal in a polarized lens. You actually line it up using a magnetic field, and that's why those things work. So I thought that was brilliant, but then I thought, well, I've got 100 years of tech that Tesla didn't have. I can probably do something else. So I started trying to figure out ways to enhance that, and finally came up with a way that actually did that. That was much stronger, by a couple of factors stronger. And it was by getting things locked into an entrained states. And then I used the gel, because if you look at a holographic plate, glass is an amorphous solid. It's not a crystalline solid, right? So it's actually, it has a flow and a motion to it. And so I started thinking, well, we lock these, interactions and wave interactions, specific waveform in a hologram. I thought, well, why the hell can't I do that with something that's a gel, right? In terms of relative timescales, the gel is closer to a piece of glass than the speed of, like a femtosecond pulse laser or something like that. So I thought, well, I'll try it. And so in the end, I was able to figure out a way to actually do that, and to use basically a gel as a holographic media, and lock a specific spin state in it, through an interference pattern using dichroic beam splitters and a reference, and kind of the same way you'd actually make a hologram, with reference and incidence beams, so you can get dynamic scattering and then lock it in. Same basic thing. I mean, it was just a new application of holographic technology in a different medium. And the whole intent of that was just to keep the degradation minimized, the same way that Tesla had done it using magnetic field beds to keep them oriented. Well, I wasn't so much worried about the orientation as I was with the spin states, so I could elevate them so that they would have a higher energy density. So when they impacted, you would get a cascading signal that your body would register as this huge oxidative insult, even though it was truly a very small insult. So a 300 milligram capsule has the same impact as, maybe a milligram, or rather, say 1,500 milligrams of normal capsules. Just a much more, it's lightning warfare, right? Blitzkrieg. You strap the speakers to the planes, you come in, your body goes nuts and thinks that it's having this huge assault. And as a result of that, it upregulates your mitochondria. You start pumping out more ATP. You get this kind of overall flushing sensation, almost like you would if you took a niacin shot. But then it, starts kicking in glutathione production, superoxide dismutase, all the antioxidant defense systems that your body has after you've been assaulted by some large, pronounced pro-oxidative insult. And so it's kind of tricking your body into doing what your body does via hormesis.
Where would you rank, ozone in terms of things you could just take, supplements and various other, let's say antioxidants and some of the other stuff you play with? Where would this rank?
Top 20. I think, and the reason I say not top 5, top 10, is because there are some things that I think are more fundamental, things that I don't actually produce, but, vitamin D, make sure you get enough D3, make sure you get enough K, make sure you get, a little bit of copper and zinc and magnesium and potassium. Those are the things that actually occupy, I'm looking for kind of, the stuff I play with is not the stuff that really should occupy the top 10. I'm doing the factors. We assume that you've already taken care of, your diet is in check,
yes,
your sleep is in check, your exercise is good, all that stuff. I mean, we all know that we should be doing that. And, before you spend, $50 to $150 in supplementation to get these super peak performance things, fix what you need to fix, you know.
The average, say American who has low vitamin D and is deficient in so many vitamins and minerals, would this still be a benefit?
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, but it's in terms of truly top 10, or where would I rank it?
Right.
Yeah, but again, take care of the real issues, because, if your cake is still made with poison, doesn't matter how pretty the icing you put on it is, ooh, look, golden sprinkles, it's still a hemlock flavored cake. You know,
Right.
get your house in order first, and then do the things that optimize performance. Like I take care of a lot of the basics. I do, my sleep is admittedly a bit wackadoo. That's probably the one thing that's the most out of filter for me. But um, I don't generally require as much, but I think in part that's because I meditate a lot, and there's a bit of an offset with how much you meditate versus how much sleep you actually need.
Yep.
But I still try and get the basics in order before I start doing, I mean, the ozone capsules are great for your gut. Also, probiotics are hugely important. I think if I had the option of doing ozone capsules or probiotics, I would do probiotics and prebiotic fibers first, and then I would start to adjust the flora, and then I would use something like the biocharged and just absolutely re-spin balance the entire gut flora ecology. Get the whole little ecosystem there operating in the right way.
So is it
Um,
important to get the gut flora right to optimize the ability of your product to do its thing?
no, actually, it helps get it right, because it'll go in and knock out candida and things like that. So it actually helps. But again, going back to your question, like what are the biggest needle movers? What's the top 10? If you want to get it spinning right, I think you take care of the really low hanging fruit. Probiotics, prebiotic fibers. Get everything in an environment where then you can fine tune it and really get some peak performance. Most of the things that I develop are, I'm scratching my own itch. I want, like, this stuff. I mean, it's my the Wizard Sciences neural serum. It was something I made, originally for people with cognitive impairments, that I then proceeded to start sucking down myself, because I want to have a better functioning mind. I mean, I used to toy with, racetams and all sorts of nootropics, and this is the best one I was able to make. And I mean, it's got a whole host of goodies that was sort of a different approach. It has PQQ, but not because of what you'd normally use it for. I put it in there because I was getting such an enhanced ATP output that I thought, well, I actually run the risk of killing a lot of the mitochondria, because there's going to be so much electron potentiation across the membranes that it's going to pop them. So then I thought, well, how can I negate that? Well, more mitochondria. So you stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis, and you're still outputting 600 horsepower, but you're doing it across 12 cylinders as opposed to across 4. Because you can get that kind of output through a lower number of mitochondria. But if you're trying to hit, a large output of ATP, that's a lot of electron potentiation, and you have to balance it. It's like any other system. Just like the body serum that we talked about before, that I was doing for the guys trying out for the Olympics. If you just work out on, you get the strongest biceps in the world, and you're doing something that requires a compound movement, you're gonna hurt yourself. And likewise, you have to balance something like this out, because if you end up with something that just kicks out a huge amount of electron flow, and gets the mitochondria just hopping, you will literally pop them. You'll actually rip through the membranes, and that's not good.
Tell us a
That's kind
little
of
more
like,
about the product, though. What else is in it? I know the carbon 60 is in it, right?
yeah, there's carbon 60 in it for a couple of reasons. That there's some certain synergies you can get when you use carbon 60 as a buffering agent because of its antioxidant capacity, but also as a carrier for a couple of other things. So it's resveratrol and NMN in a balanced format, so you can again stimulate both sides of the cycle. You knock out the oxidative stress load, but you also enhance oxidation by converting to NAD plus and getting the electron transport chain optimized. And then I also put in PQQ for biogenesis, then coenzymes like CoQ10, ubiquinone, just so you can stimulate the cycle a little further at different points in the ETC. And then some things to actually clear out plaquing through the glymphatic system in the
Wow.
brain. Because we all have, like Alzheimer's, right? Alzheimer's is a symptom where you have amyloid beta plaquing and tau protein aggregation, and there's this kind of whole tangled mess that's happening neurally. And your body has a system called the lymphatic system that only triggers in the middle of the night. And it's this very little small section, and we've only known about it for a couple of years, but it uses cerebrospinal fluid to purge your brain and clean it at night. And so if you can stimulate that and you can enzymatically break down the aggregate plaquing, then you clean out the debris that's inhibiting your neural performance. And so that has the net effect of upregulating your mind.
So could this potentially affect Alzheimer's? I know you got to be careful with what you claim, but it sounds like it's related.
Well, I suppose, people will probably test it out. What I can definitively say is it upregulates ATP production, and it helps mitochondria, and it definitely cleans out plaquing. I don't know that I could definitively say anything about that.
Well, I am going to conduct my own experiments and find out. I'll let you know.
Please.
First, I got to buy a bunch of beakers. That's the first step. I don't have any.
Yeah, no, definitely share the data. That's, at some point there's a lot of things that I'd like to do in terms of, IRB trials and get some good solid human clinical data on what it will help and what it won't help. The jury's kind of out on that, but I'm happy to share data as I get it. If I do that as an experiment, I will 100% share, and then, shout out.
Yeah, that would be exciting.
Yeah, that'd be great.
What could one who buys this new, and what's it called again? I'm sorry.
Oh, Neural RX.
So Neural RX.
Yeah, neural prescription. So.
And what's the website where they can look at it?
Wizard Sciences.
Wizard Sciences. And so what's the tangible .com. Got it. And we'll link all this in the show notes. But yeah. What's the tangible immediate effect that one could expect after taking one of these?
Your brain will come online. A friend of mine, Molly Malouf, she's an MD in San Francisco. She loves it. She's been touting it. Actually, I wouldn't have even put it out for people to buy, except Molly started posting about it. Thought it was so good that my inbox started blowing up with people and friends of friends and people trying to get it. So I just thought, okay, I'll just I'll put it up so people are going to have access to it. So there was that, but Molly's experience and what she said was she felt like she had just taken the stuff from the movie Limitless, which is honestly it's intense. I mean, you feel it. You will your brain turns on, and I've done, like I said, plenty of work with nootropics, and this was the best thing I was able to do. Prior to this, the best thing I had hit was stacking Siltep and phenylpiracetam, and that was just, oh my God, that kicked ass. It was great.
Well, you told me about this months ago, and I was kind of blown away at the time by what you were able to achieve while taking that stack. But you're saying this is
stack. Yeah, this blows it out of the water. So it's but I mean, think about that though. It took me years to figure out how to do it. It's not like it was just woo instant. I mean, I had worked on other nootropics. This particular compound, I came up with it and did it the whole thing in literally it was 7 minutes shy of 3 weeks. But we, which, and I know that specifically for a very different reason, but it didn't take too much to actually do this once I had a purpose for it. But I had been tinkering with nootropics for years, trying to iron stuff out. And, it's kind of like looking for a specific purpose. Last year with, biocharge, we were trying to figure out ways that we could get people to have the experience with ozone so that they would be protected from lots of, environmental insults that were popular, at the time, in 2019.
Well, I have heard a lot of other experts say that ozone can be really effective against such.
Ozone is incredibly effective. It's not, they're actually on that particular note, because I want to be 100% transparent. Like if you're contending with something like that, great as an adjunct support, not as effective as some of the other stuff out there. There's some great therapeutics that really do have a lot of benefit.
What do you think of the nebulized what is it, hydrogen peroxide? Dr. Mercola talks about it a lot. Have you
I,
heard?
it might be hydrogen peroxide. It might be chlorine dioxide. That's perhaps a little more likely.
Yeah, maybe so.
Um, yeah, all of those things. I think they have an impact. The one thing that, and we have a patent at the university where I do a lot of work. For some different effects of viruses and things like that. And one of the things that concerns me is a lot of times, and I think we're seeing this with people who have like COVID long haul syndrome. You think you're clear of a virus, but you're actually not. It stays dormant. Like in the case of say like herpes, varicella zosters, and things like that, they stay dormant in the basal nerve ganglion, right? Or at least that was always the common thought. What I've been finding over the past year of really working with that in the lab and trying to figure stuff out is that yes, it does stay there, but it's not the only place it stays. And a lot of those things can evade detection by actually staying inside the mitochondria. Because
Ooh.
well, a virus is a very tiny little thing, and they can effectively go into stealth mode if you have different. If you're not expressing say like everybody's always fixated on spike proteins lately. Let's say you don't express spike proteins. Well, then your body doesn't really know how to find, isolate, and negate that viral load. So if a virus can drop down and hide inside the inner mitochondrial membrane without expressing, then you still have it there. The signature is still there and it can produce at some later point, or it could even go through a process called horizontal cell transfer, where an infected mitochondria will actually punch a nanotubule across to another cell that's proximate and transmit the infected mitochondria into another cell where it can then propagate through that cell, all without expression of surface protein receptors, which is, a little bit harrowing if you think of the implications of that, because you can effectively have a virus that goes into stealth mode and keeps a low level. And then at some point down the road, poof, there can be some triggering factor and then it can go absolutely crazy, which is, what happens with varicella zosters and say shingles, right? They go dormant for decades. We have ideas on where we think these things are being held, what's happening. And in a lot of cases, sure, those are, but it's again, it's not the only component. Nature is incredibly good with redundant systems in terms of, the longevity stuff that I've been focused on for the past decade. Nature will try and weed you out, and it has sets and subsets and subsets of subsets of little boxes that have to get checked off biologically in order to keep your body functioning at a peak level. And if you don't check all the boxes, it goes, oh, sorry, you missed line 45 on form 72C. We're going to eliminate you from the gene pool.
Right.
And that's kind of the trick. But it's just one of those things. Nature is very, very good at finding ways to survive, and viruses are no different. They'll kind of hide out. And again, going back to the point that we talked about offline, that's at least the conception as we see it. It may turn out to be something slightly different than that. Jury's still out. And I too, I've seen a lot of data both ways. I really don't know. I think we'll peg that down in the next probably 5-10 years, because there are a lot of really good scientists looking at it.
And I know you took a pretty deep dive into COVID for a while. Are there things
I
that
had
you
it
can't?
twice.
Well, I didn't want to say that, but yeah. So being the guy you are, you tried to figure it out. So I'm curious what you came up with, what kind of therapies for you seem to work.
Actually, the thing that made I ended up with myocarditis after the fact. So when I first got it, which was I think last April of 2020, I made some stuff in the lab, synthesized it to suppress the symptoms, and at the time I thought, oh great, I'll just suppress the symptoms, I'll get antibodies, I'll be all good. Turns out they don't persist. So then at the end of the year, literally New Year's Eve, my daughter tested positive, and when I was grabbing my handy dandy little bottle of biocharge and I was taking it, and I realized, that's odd, I don't smell any ozone. And I thought, ozone, it's incredibly pungent, and it's got this really specifically acrid sort of smell to it, and I thought, Maybe the guys at the encapsulation place, maybe they just did the best job ever. So I really put my nose in the bottle and took a big whiff, nothing. And then I cracked one of the capsules open and I held it to my nostrils and put a little dab inside both nostrils.
Nothing.
Smelled nothing.
Whoa.
But damn it. And then a day later, my taste buds just went, pretty much flat. And damn, twice. I got this thing twice. And that was less than thrilling. But the thing that was persistent was the myocarditis, just the inflammation in the heart tissue. And it's intriguing to me, and the jury is, still out on this in most places, but I find it interesting that the dysregulations we're seeing are all happening in systems that are mitochondrially dense. It would lead one to believe that perhaps there is a correlation, because your cardiac cells have 5,000 mitochondria roughly per cell, and that's going to affect men and women. But in women, the highest density for mitochondria is in the ovaries. They're
Hmm.
about 100,000. And what happens when you dysregulate those? Well, you end up with endocrine cascades that are not so good. Your hormones get out of kilter. You start to lose hair. You know,
And we are
that's
hearing about, menstrual disruptions and other related problems.
yeah. And I think we're going to be seeing more of that. And I know a lot of people who have problems with their eyes now, myself included, that didn't prior to having that. And again, in terms of highest density, heart, brain, eyes. Um, so it's not terribly shocking. What actually concerns me is if I know that it's got the point of highest and then it has the third highest, logically speaking, it probably would be impacting me cognitively. But you don't necessarily have the ability to self-referentially check and see if you have jelly smeared across your lens.
Right.
So it could be that there's a grave degree of impairment going on there that I'm just not able to process because I'm in fact the system that's being impaired.
Well, so if COVID is kind of hiding out and hanging out in the mitochondria, is are antioxidants or any other therapies that are mitochondrial boosting the way to go in your opinion?
No, actually, it wouldn't. It would just give them more fodder to spread.
Mm.
And that's the thing is, like I said, when something is designed to evade your immune system, um, we don't really have anything that functions at that level. You have to do things like triggering mitophagy, and really, how do you do that? Well, the best way to do that is fasting, and to do water fasting, which is kind of a bitch. It's not the easiest thing to do, but 3-4 day water fast will probably assist you, if not specifically with that virus, then lots of other, subcellular debris and senescent cell purging and things like that.
Yep.
And at the other side of it, you become stronger, just because you purge a lot of senescent cells, almost if you have like NK stem cell therapy or something like that really just goes through and scours out senescent cells. Yeah, personally, I would say the best thing to do is put down the fork for a few days and just do a legit water fast, not coffee, not tea, but pure water for about 72 hours. And there was a study that came out a couple of years ago that definitively showed that a water fast for 72 hours triggered a ton of immune stem cells and started to rebuild your immune system. And one of the things that's probably not terribly well known is that the difference between doing water, coffee, and tea fasting. There's a lot of people who say like, oh, they're the purists that only want to water fast, and then there's the other guys who say, oh, well, water, coffee, or tea, as long as there's no caloric density. I would argue that there is a difference in terms of how many senescent cells get purged, because your body mechanistically goes through and kills those things, breaks them apart, triggers lysosomes to go in and scour through and break things down, and then reuse them and reconfigure them because it's very efficient. But if you have an energy deficit, you optimize that. If you don't, then you slow that process down. You'll still have it happen, but you slow it down. And coffee and tea, because they have a differing pH, there's a proton gradient, and
Mm-hmm.
that our bodies have evolved in a way that we're a chemical battery for all intents and purposes. And anytime you express a proton gradient, you modulate the way your body's able to pull energy. And we're great on a mechanistic standpoint, we can pull energy out of just about anything. So if you provide something that has that gradient, well, then we utilize the energy from that.
So we think calories are the only way to get energy in general, but there
Yeah,
are other
not
ways
the
to
case, man. I
skin the
mean,
cat.
yeah, sure, you can do it photonically. I mean, anybody who's gone out and feels better after being in a bit of sun knows this. It's just difficult to quantify, but photons oscillating at 670 nanometers impact the cell at that frequency. They, modulate the cytochrome, bump off a nitric oxide, cycle in an oxygen, and mechanically or truly photonically stimulates the electron transport chain and pushes stuff down the cycle into oxidative phosphorylation, and you get more energy like that, and the rapidity of the cell cycle is enhanced. So I mean, that's why people use red light to regrow hair and things like that. I mean, the hair growth product that I've been working on, same thing. We have kind of broken down between men and women because hormonally they need different things, and faster and fastest in terms of the expression of what's going to work the best. And the fastest method is, and I'll send you some pics. You can post them if you want. But
Absolutely.
if some of the people that have been doing the testing, the results are pronounced, and people think like, oh, it's not, you can't do that. You can't get that kind of result. Sure, you can. If you're artificially stimulating the cell cycle so that the cycle time is decreased and you get more rounds, then the cell thinks, like, oh, I'm slacking. I got to pump out more hair.
Yeah.
And it does what it wants to do.
So
But
do you
but
rub some of the solution on your bald spot and then shine a red light on it?
yeah, actually, so you either with your hands kind of stimulate it or use a dermal roller.
Mm-hmm.
And it's repair hair loss is the name of the thing. It's repairhairloss.com.
Cool.
So you stimulate it, and then you put the serum on and massage the serum in, and then you shine a red light on it. And there's a whole host of kind of subcellular mechanisms that are using to do that, and also some different things that you take internally to trigger your body to be in a state where it can actually grow. Because you've got to decrease inflammation, and they're kind of the four phases of hair growth, right? So normally you hear just like the three, the catagen, telogen, and anagen, but there's also the exogen where it's actually purging things follicularly. And so you kind of have to look at those phases and figure out, okay, if I want this to perform a certain way, how best do I stimulate this thing and in what pattern? So you have to internally change some things, but then you have to topically change some things. And then because there's not a tremendous amount of blood flow there, you're better off rather than waiting for the blood flow. If you use photons to stimulate it, you can impact the cycle. But you have to be careful because photons are, it's a little strange when you do photonic stimulation because it triggers this thing. It's called a Janus mediator from the Greek god with two faces.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a thing, the technical term is called a biphasic dose response curve, which is the fancy science way of saying like it's got an upside and it's got a downside, right?
Yeah.
So you can stimulate the benefit up to a point, but if you go past that threshold, then you negate the benefit and you actually drop down below, the threshold of where you started. The best research that I probably read on that kind of stuff that I based a lot of the process on was a fellow at Harvard named Mike Camblin, who does a lot of research on traumatic brain injuries and using photonics to stimulate repair in neural tissue. And it's the same thing, just you modulate the frequency, but you can get the same output in the cell. And so, that was with that particular thing, that's what I was looking at is like, how do you use photons to do that? Because going back to our point, there's all sorts of ways that your body can pull energy. I mean, you can pull a bit of energy from chlorophyll if you're a vegetarian. It's not a ton, but there's a little bit, and then, it's things like that. You start stacking up all these little bitty things. It's kind of like the concept of being, bled to death by a million paper cuts or 1,000 paper cuts. Well, you can also build back the entire castle one pebble at a time. If you just stack everything in exactly the right way, you get these huge outsized effects because of all the little subcellular synergies, which is like I told you before, like working with the guys that were the Olympic hopefuls, rather than going for these little incremental gains. I thought, everybody's doing that, right? And we already have kind of quantified the range that we're able to make the impact. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to see if I can't get this kind of cascading effect where I can sort of build like this cellular tsunami to output energy in a different capacity and get, neural entrainment so that their muscles are all firing in kind of coherent fashion, and
without rupturing the tendons. And, yeah.
right. Yeah, and that's the thing. But taking those systems into account and looking at like where can I additively get impact to the system, and it's no different. The body in totality is you're trying to look at how best can I make this thing perform the most effectively. How best can I yield the result that I'm trying to get with the fewest parts and the fewest issues, and it's that elegance, right? You're going for an elegant biological solution, which I mean, it's peak. That's right, like the biohackers thing. That's what we're all doing, is we're trying to figure out how do we manipulate the environment so that we can get the best result out of this. You know,
Yep.
I'm lucky because I'm in a situation where now I get compensated relatively well to actually just tinker and do stuff. Yeah, seriously, and just to play, to do the stuff that I would have been doing anyway.
Yeah, but you know what, man, you are clearly making an impact in the world, and some of these things we need to push them out in a bigger way, because I know we didn't even touch on a lot of the things that you've worked on, but they're all things that are really impactful and can improve the lives of a lot of people, and longevity and all good things. So it's cool. You love your job, you get to play, but you're also making a difference. So
Yeah,
kudos.
well, I mean, I do. I take it very seriously. There's a sort of a responsibility, and I really do feel like when you have a gift and you're given something like that, you're being kind of a jerk if you don't do it for the benefit of everybody, right? I mean, because we really are all connected, and when you feel that it's sort of your core and that's kind of the place you're coming from, yeah, why wouldn't you? Share it, help. That's the carbon negative concrete. I'm doing that because I really, I want to negate the greenhouse gases. And if everybody implemented that tomorrow, we'd suddenly drop 13 gigatons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. We're going to do the X Prize that Elon Musk is doing with that, because it's a no-brainer. Literally, just change a couple of things. You don't have to change the cost. You stop wasting sand. It's a net win for the environment.
I thought we could just do the Bill Gates thing, where he wants to shoot a bunch of particles into the atmosphere and block the sun.
there are certain things that I don't really think that passes my my intuitive smell test of this is a perhaps not good idea.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That freaks me out just about more than anything I've heard in the last few months. There's a lot of freaky stuff going on. But
yeah, well, I think if memory serves, I think I saw an article about that years ago, and I think they were doing something like barium particulate. It was something that was like, you really wouldn't want that to end up in your crops everywhere. You wouldn't want people eating it. And the idea of just saying, just put it up in the air. I don't know if that's, if that's actually what they were, really positing. But if that's the case, probably not the best idea.
And just blocking the sun, which gives life and energy and vitality to every living thing on Earth. Probably not a good move.
Probably not a good move. That's there might be some shocking downstream consequences to tinkering with systems that are far more complicated than we understand. That's why I love the idea of what you can do with CRISPR, but personally, I don't feel like we're far enough along the curve to really understand the impacts of tinkering with that sort of toolkit. Maybe once we really have quantum computing down and we can really assess what's going on, yeah, then maybe that's the case. But for right now, there are just some systems that I don't think we should be playing with. We may have seen them, but it's kind of, not to beat a dead horse with the analogy, but that's like, leaving the gun cabinet open when you have a daycare. I just really don't think that's the best idea ever.
It is mind-blowing. It really is. But luckily we have you on the right side of things. You're the Superman to their villain.
Well, I just want to help, man. And anything I can do that I'm able to do that. I mean, you know me. That's legit how I actually do it. If I can help, I help.
Well, I think it's your superpower. We're all better off for having you, man, and we're about out of time, so I should let you run.
Much love, Jack. As always, it's awesome talking to you.
Oh man, likewise. And one last thing is, if you would remind everybody the products that you have and the websites.
Sure. Biocharged, ozonated capsules, which rock and they're charged that they have kind of an outsized effect. That's biocharge.co. And then this guy is the Neural RX, and it's wizardsciences.com.
Oh man.
And yeah, I'd recommend everybody try those things out. I legitimately, it is scratching my own itch. I do these things all the time because they work. Yeah. And not to say at some point somebody hopefully will come up with something that's way better than both, and then that will push me to come up with something that is better than that. And hence we move the ball down the field.
That's how it works. Well, we'll link up to all that, and definitely encourage everybody to try both of those products. I'm excited myself. So, cool. Ian, thanks, man. This was really a lot of fun, and we got to do it again soon.
Peace out, brother.
Take care.